In this tutorial, we will build CRUD application with Spring Boot. And here is the key thing you need to know. You need to know that HTTP method represents the client intention. The client uses them to express which action to apply on a specific resource. So here is the HTTP method and the description. We have get, the client request to retrieve data. We have post, the client request to send new data. We have put, the client request to change data on the server side, and then we have delete, the client request to delete data on the server side. Our application will consider this get, post, put, and delete, making it a CRUD application, and we will work with this in this application. By creating new Spring Boot project for our CRUD application, go to the file, new Spring Boot starter project. So it will connect us to the startspring.io. So here is the name I will be using for this tutorial. The name of the project, CRUD application, group coding techniques. That is the name of this channel. We have the type as Maven. We will be using Maven build tool, Java version 17, language Java. So here is a description, CRUD application tutorial. So the package name is coding techniques. So let's click next and add the dependency for this project. It is a web application. We need a Spring Starter web dependency, and we need the Spring Boot dev tool for the live reload, and we also need the MySQL driver. We will be using MySQL, and then Spring Data JPA, which is the bridge between our application and the database. So here is the 4 dependency I will be using on this project. Okay, click finish. So it is building. So here is our project ready. If you click and open the CRUD application project, you can see we have this file source main Java, and here is where our starter class is. Okay, so the next thing we will do is we will configure MySQL database, and here you can see we have the application.properties inside the resource folder. Okay, so here is where we will add the configuration for MySQL database. So the next thing we will do is we will create a new schema. So let's create a new schema. You can see we have create a new schema in the connected server. Click on this, then the schema will be student. Okay, click on OK, apply, finish. So if you open this, you can see we have no table. Once we add the configuration for the MySQL database and create a model class, it will map to this database that we have. The table will be the name of the class. So let's add the configuration application to the application.properties. You can see we have this is the configuration that we will be using, and this URL that you see here is the URL that connects us to the MySQL database, that is student database. So we have this username and password. You will add the username and password based on your setup for the MySQL workbench. We have this Hibernate configuration, which automatically update the database. We also have login configuration. These two are the login configuration. The first one log SQL statement, while the second one log Hibernate type information. So let's add this to the application.properties file. Okay, so we will just paste this to the application.properties file and click on save. So the next thing we will do is we will create a model class. before then, let's create a new package called this package model. Inside the model, we will create a new class student. Okay, student. Okay, so we will annotate this class with @entity. It is a entity class. Entity @entity. Okay, so let's have field. The first field that we'll have is the private long ID. Okay, and we will annotate this with @id. So this will be the primary key in the database. @id @generated value. We will add the strategy generation type. We access auto. So let's have the order field for this. So we have the private string name, then followed by the private string department, and then we also have the private int level, that is the level for the student. Okay, so first let's generate constructor for this source. Generate constructor using field excluding the ID. So here is the constructor, and we will also generate the getters and setters. So source generate. So okay, what we have so far now, if we run the application, we can see we will have the student table. Okay, so let's run this application and check our MySQL workbench. So here is the CRUD application. New run as Spring Boot app. So you can see it will start and it will take a time. Our application started. You can see we have it started on port 8080. The next thing we will do is check our database. So when we refresh, you can see we have table. Inside this table, you can see we have student. So when we click, you can see, let's click on this, you can see all the field that we have. So you see we have ID, department, level, and name. Okay, so the next thing we will do is we will start the having our CRUD application, where we will start with the create, saving the user. So now we will work on the create, but before then, let's create a repository that we will use to interact with the database. So let's create new package for the repository. Call this repository. Okay, so inside this we will have new interface, and we will call this student repository. Okay, this interface will extend the CRUD repository. By extending the CRUD repository, we will have access to some method which we will use to perform CRUD operation. So let's extend CRUD repository. So we will pass student and followed by long here. So okay, now that we set up our repository, let's create a service package. So new package and call it service. So we will first create, inside this service we will first create interface which our controller will use. So we'll call this student service. Okay, and inside this student service we'll declare a method for saving the user, that is create. So let's have void, so void, and call this save student. So this will have the student as the parameter, student, and we will create a class that will implement this. So let's create a new class, call this student service implementation, and then this will implement our student service. First we will annotate this with at service. So let's implement the student service at unimplemented method. So we need the repository here, so let's private student repository, then let's call the save method student repository dot save, and we pass the student here. Okay, now we finish with the save. In the service class we need to annotate this method with this field student repository with at auto wired. Okay, so let's save these changes. We need to save the student repository as well, so that this error will gone. Okay, now we need a controller, new package for the controller. Okay, so this will create a new class, student controller. Okay, and we will annotate this with at REST controller, or are telling the dispatcher servlet that we don't need a view, we just want to return the value in the action directly. So this will talk to the student service interface instead of the student service implementation. Okay, so let's have private student service, and we will generate a constructor for this. Source generate a constructor using field. Okay, and then the next thing we do here is that we will have a controller action. So let's have create here to indicate that it is a create. So we will start with the at post mapping and call this endpoint save student. Okay, so the action will be public response entity of student. Okay, and call this save student. We will use the request body to send the request. We will send the request with the request body, so we need to have the at request body of student, so that we can get the student and save student. Okay, so the only thing we need to do inside this method, first we will use the student service and call the save method to save the student, and we need to return response entity dot okay, followed by we will have the student as the body. So let's save these changes. So the next thing we will do, we'll test this in the postman. So let's go to the postman and we will have the post, because it is a post. We will change this to post, then have the local host save student. So we need to add the body here. Here you go to the row, so we will add it like this here in the. So first let's check in the student how it started with the name, department, and the level. So we don't need the ID because it will generate by the database. It will generate automatically. So let's go to the postman, and then first we need a name. So I will add this name as Aliyu Sahabo. Okay, so followed by we need a okay. Here there is T. Here make sure the spelling is correct as you added in your model class, otherwise it will return null. So let's click on send to see. We will have the response body here. You can see we have the ID one, which is generated automatically. We have name Aliyu Sahabo, department mathematics, and level 300 level, and the response status is okay. As you can see, we are returning this response body from the controller. If you check the controller, student controller here, we are returning it as a response body. So now let's check the database to refresh to see the details. You see we have the ID one, the department mathematics. Okay, so the next thing we will do is we will work on the get. Okay, the next we will work on is the read. So let's go to the student service and add a new declaration, method declaration. We'll call this get student of type iterable student. So this will be get student, the name of this method, get student 2. Let's go to the student service and implement this. Add unimplemented method. The only thing we will do here is we will use the student repository and call the method find all. So this will return the list of students from the database. So let's go to the controller, and now is read. Okay, we'll have a method public response entity of iterable of student, and we call this method get student. Okay, this controller action, and then we will use this iterable student. Okay, student equal to student service dot we have get student method. Okay, this will return, let's return a response entity, and we'll access the method status. We set the HTTP status to accepted. Let's use the accepted. Okay, then let's add a header before this body, and we may add this header and say it like a semester 2024. Okay, so the last thing is the body, and we pass the student. Okay, so now what we will do next is to go to the postman and call this. So we need to add this get mapping, so and call the endpoint student. Okay, so let's try to access this endpoint. Okay, remember it is a get and we don't need the body now, so we are trying to access student. Though we have a single student in the database, let's try to call this. Oops, we are having this error because we did not provide the constructor, that is default constructor. We need to provide it in the student class. So let's generate a constructor, generate constructor with no field. Deselect this all, and then so let's save these changes and then go back to the postman and make the request again. Okay, you can see we have these accepted to O2 and we have the data. We get this data from the database, and if you go to the head, you can see we will have this semester, second semester, and the year 2024. Okay, so this is what we have for the read, and the next thing is update. In this section of this tutorial, we will work on the update. So let's go to the student service interface and declare a method. So this will be optional of student. We need to get the student first by ID in order to update the student. So let's name this get student by ID. Okay, and this will have the parameter of long ID. So let's implement this inside the student service implementation. Okay, so let's implement add on implemented method. So here it is. Let's have optional of student. In this case, now we're gonna get the student using the student repository dot find by ID. Okay, so now in case if we did not get the student with the ID, we need to throw exception. Okay, so let's call the student dot is present. So we will add the exclamation mark here. If the student is not present, then we will throw exception. So now let's create a new package for the exception. Okay, and call this exception. So inside this exception, we will create new class and call this student not found exception. Student not found exception. So this class student not found exception that we just create will extend runtime exception. Okay, so let's generate a constructor for this. So we will have generate constructor from the super class, that is using the super class. We'll pass the message here. The message for this exception is no student with given ID. Okay, no student ID in ID. So let's use this exception that we just create inside this. If student is not present, then we will throw. Okay, here it is. So the next thing we will do is we'll return the student if the student is present, but if it is not present, we will throw the student not found exception. So let's save these changes and go to the student controller. So here we will start the update. So we'll have the output mapping for this. For the update, we will be using the output mapping, and then the path will be update student. Okay, update student. Then the request will come with the ID. We'll pass the ID during the request. Okay, so we'll have ID here. We will get it using the add variable. So we'll have public response entity of student, and then we will name this update student. So followed by, we need the add variable here in the parameter add variable long ID. So followed by the request body, because we will pass the request body. So we need the at request body student new student detail, student details. Okay, the request will come with the ID of the student and new student detail that we want to update. Okay, so here let's start the implementation of this. So we need the optional of student, and we will call this student details. Okay, and we will use the student service that we will use the get student by ID and pass this ID. Okay, so the next thing we will do is we'll get the student using the student details dot get. Okay, so now that we get the student, we will update the detail. Okay, so student dot will set new details for the name. Okay, and we will use the new student details dot get name. The same thing for the department, student dot set department, and use new student details dot get department. And we also need the student dot get set level, new student details dot get level. Okay, this is fine, and we need to save this using the student service. We will call the save student method and save this student, and we will return the response entity, return the response entity dot okay, followed by the student here. Okay, now we finish having this implementation, but in case of the exception, we need to return the response that the student not found to the client that is making the request. Okay, so let's create new controller advice to handle this. We call it exception controller advice. So we will annotate this with at controller advice, at controller advice. Okay, we'll have a method. First we'll need at exception handler, followed by the exception that we want to return the response for. So in this case is student not found exception dot class. Okay, so we need a public response entity. We'll create the object that we want to return as a response later and call it this method exception handler. Okay, so okay, so now what we will do here is we will first go to the model and create arrow detail model, arrow details, and this will have a field of private string message, private string message. Okay, so let's generate getters and setters for this. Okay, go to the source, generate getters and setters for this. Okay, save these changes and then go back to the exception controller advice. We will return the arrow detail here. So let's create arrow details equal to new arrow details, new arrow details. So let's set the message arrow details dot set message, and we will name this message no student with the given ID. Okay, and we'll return a response entity, return a response entity the bat request and pass the body as the arrow details. Okay, so now we finish with the update. The next thing is we will test this. So let me copy this part and go to the and then Let's delete this and paste the update. We doesn't have the student with the ID too, so let's test the exception first, and we will use the row. So let's send this. Sorry, it is a put mapping. So here is where we are making the mistake. Okay, let's send this. So you see we have no student with the given ID. So now let's add the Adam in front of this and set the real ID for the Adam. Okay, so let's send this. Okay, you can see it changes. We added this Adam, and let's try to change this department to physics. Send the request again. Okay, you see it changes to physics, and let's check the database. So here in the database, let's rerun this and see if the values changes. So you see we have the values that we just update. Okay, the next thing we will work on is delete. The last part of this tutorial we will have the delete. So to have the delete, we need to go to the student service and declare a new method, void delete student by ID. Okay, and this will have a long ID. So let's go to the student service implementation and implement this new method. Okay, here in the student service implementation, let's implement this new method at on implement method. So the only thing we will do here is that we will call the student repository dot find dot delete by ID. Then we will pass the ID of the student. Okay, so let's save this and go back to the controller, student controller. So in this case we will deal with delete. Okay, so we'll use the add delete mapping, and we'll pass the part endpoint as delete student followed by the ID. Okay, so we will get the student ID of the student that define the controller action, public response entity string. So let's name this method delete student. Okay, and we will have the add path variable. So add path variable long ID. So now let's call the student service. We have the method delete student by ID. Okay, so we will return response entity dot okay, and here we will add the ID deleted. Okay, so let's test this endpoint. We only have a single student, so let's go and try to delete this student with the ID 1, and here we will use the delete. Okay, then send the request. So you see student with the ID 1, here is the ID 1 deleted. Now when we check this, refresh, if we refresh, we will not longer have this because it's deleted. Okay, this is the end of this tutorial. So this is the last part of this tutorial. See you in my next videos.